technically we were off there. So I'll start again. Headphones on, so you can understand my Northern Irish accent that's been influenced by American and Canadian experiences. So my apologies to the translator if they can't really understand me. First part is we have a wonderful project in London that's ongoing, and I'm very proud of it. Closer, closer. Yeah, I'll be like a rock star. We have various challenges, which is to build a new sewer. You know, you may say that's not very innovative. We're building essentially a big sewer throughout central London, but we have a vision to reconnect the people of London to the river. A lot of times their back is turned to the river, so we want them to reconnect to that wonderful facility that's the river. And our press renamed it the Super Sewer because it is a big sewer, 25 kilometers connecting to another 6.5 kilometer tunnel, so it's a major piece of infrastructure. If we go back long enough in time, London is really built on a swamp, and there was all of these tidal inlets, tidal channels, and over time, all the way from Henry VIII all the way up to the early 1800s, those channels were culverted over and became what we call the lost rivers of London. In the early 1800s, huge amount of development. Population grew from about 1 million to 2 to 3 million. That put a lot of pressure on those channels because before they were just stormwater channels, and all of a sudden they got their sewage connected to them. So they became pretty rancid. And that led to what we all call in London the Great Stink of 1858, when Parliament even decided to look at moving to Oxford because the smell was so bad, because the river was just an open sewer. That instigated the building of probably the first major interceptor system in the world, and Joseph Bazalgette built this, and you can see here the interception of that sewage that was going into the river. It transported it to the east, and they built large storage tanks, so it was outgoing tide. They would flush it and send it over to France and let them deal with it. The design challenge was, Bazalgette had a population of 2 million to handle. He designed for 4 million, and that was exceeded in the 1890s, so his design was quickly overwhelmed by the population. Fortunately, that interceptor system was made of brick. They used Portland cement for the first time, and today it's still the backbone of London's sewage system. And if you go in and explore it, as some people do, it is in wonderful shape, and it'll last for another 150 years if it's looked after. We've also mentioned change. One of the big changes that we deal with in London is population growth. And we're trying to size this project to handle 2 million more people, as well as the development that's going on. So this collage basically shows the pressures that we have. Is Southeast England, and London in particular, has a water supply shortage. They don't have enough water during drought to supply everybody. Everybody wants a washing machine and a dishwasher, so water use goes up. Development. You know, if you go to London, you'll see development all right along the river, which is where the combined sewers are located. So that's more pressure. We have looked at using green infrastructure or sustainable urban drainage, but there's very little space to put that sort of facility in or to retrofit existing development. It's very costly, very disruptive. And of course, what all that leads to is our CSOs, a typical little picture. When it rains, it overwhelms the interceptor system, discharges to the river, and this is an example of one of our major discharges. In the 1990s until the 2000s, Thames Water, I'm really here representing Thames Water and our new utility called Tideway. Thames Water developed a scheme that looked at 3 major components. One was the improvements, both in capacity and treatment processes, to 5 major treatment works. They have built what we call the Lee Tunnel, which captures one of the largest CSOs that discharges into a more sensitive water body that is built in operation. And in fact, last November, we inspected it and it was in pretty good shape. Then what's going on now is the London Tideway Tunnel, which is a full-length tunnel that goes from the west of London to the east and connects into the Lee Tunnel. So it transfers flow from about 34 different CSOs that discharge into the river today about 50 times. And that will reduce that discharge to 4 or less and capture over 90% of the CSO that currently discharges into the river. To get where we are today, we had an extensive public consultation process. You can probably imagine the turmoil that people would have if we came along and said, this is where we're going to put a major construction site that's going to be there for 7 to 10 years. What do you think of it? And some of those public hearings were very contentious, and in one case we had to get security to escort ourselves out because the people were not very happy with the idea. But we got over it by being honest, by going out and talking to people and explaining why we need it and what we were doing to minimize the disruption that we would do to the neighborhood. Another part of it was planning. The government regulations were such that we could not get a planning permit for the 14 different boroughs that we would go through in London. So we went to the UK government, and there was a process that we could follow to get what is called a development consent. Little did we know that that would take over 150,000 pages of testimony and detailed technical work to prove to the infrastructure planning group that we needed to build this project. I'd mentioned that Thames Water developed the 3 legs of the London Tideway improvements. Thames Water decided that the risk and the cost of doing that would be too much for that single utility to handle. So a new wastewater utility was formed. It's technically called Bazalgette Tunnel Limited after the original Victorian engineer. We operate under the name of Tideway. And what is kind of unique about this is we actually, as well as going out for a competitive bid for the contractors, we went out for a competitive bid for the financiers. So financial companies were given the opportunity to come in and say, we can finance the construction, finance the operation of this scheme. And it came about that the equity came out of the major insurance companies. In the next slide, I'll show a little bit more. But what was also very unusual was the involvement of government. Now, Ofwat is the Office of Water. I'm sure you have the same here in Poland. That's the regulatory government agency. It sets the utility rate, how much people will pay for this. And the first thing that we found is during our consultation, was estimating this would cost about £80, 400 in Polish units, I believe, per year. With the competitive bidding we did for the financial part of it, the financial companies came in and said, well, we can finance this at a much lower interest rate, given the risk that we're associated with, the surety of getting the money from the customers. That is now £30 a year. So it was a big reduction just because we competitively bid the financing. We also have another surety from DEFRA, which is the regulatory agency in the UK government that sets pollution limits, if you will. And what they did, they came back and say, if everything goes, I'll not use the usual term I would use, if everything goes wrong, like a tunnel machine breaks or the tunnel machine sticks, which happens for major tunneling, or a major design construct company goes bust, the government would step in and finish the project. That also give surety to the financial folks and reduce the risk of the whole scheme. I'll go on to the next one. So this is basically our structure. We have 3 major works contractors in the east, west, and central, and a system integrator that comes along really for the SCADA part of the project. Above all of this is the financiers, and you can see some major insurance companies are part of this. And what we have found is 2 million UK pensioners, their pension is getting the return from building this project, which is very positive for that. Underneath all of that is our project manager. I work for what is now Jacobs. Jacobs took over CH2M last December, so even bigger consulting firm. A little bit on their scheme. As I said, we have, we have 3 major works contractors in the east, west, and central. And that's really because of the geology that we're dealing with. In the west, we have clay, so the tunneling methods and the machines are different. In the central, we have basically sands and gravels, a little bit of clay, a little bit of chalk at the transition between the two. Then in the east, we have chalk with some flints in it. So each one of those have unique construction requirements. And at the top, there is the joint ventures that are formed to build these different pieces. This part of the project is £4.2 billion. The other 2 parts, the works improvements and the Lee Tunnel, were roughly £1.4 billion. So overall, you may as well call it £7 billion is the total cost of improving the water quality of the tidal Thames. We like to think we're transformational when it comes to health and safety. And one of the things we set up was this center called EPIC, and it tells you there it's an Employee Project Induction Center. We require every worker, every person working on the project, even designers or secretaries in the office, have to go through this training. What it is we've hired real actors who reenact a major site incident where a young worker was killed because he wanted to get the job done, got on with it. He hit a high voltage electric line, got burnt, and died. And it goes through the whole life cycle of that incident, to the police investigating it, the bottom left picture, to the pressures from the management who's off in a remote office somewhere, calling the works manager to say, well, why aren't you getting this done? All the way through to the impact on the young family that the dad died. So that's the bottom right picture. So we have these processes that go through. It's a whole day experience, and we've got, over 7,000 people have gone through that. The long and short of it is, this is a picture of major incidents that causes work-related injuries that you have to take days off. Normal projects, there's a ramp up, then there's a bit of a bulge, and what we have here is for the Olympics, the 2012 Olympics, all in London. The Cross Rail project which is a major rail project going across London. The last one is Heathrow Terminal 5. All had a bulge after the project was really getting into the full construction. We're maintaining a very low rate of injuries, simply because people are more aware and more attuned to avoiding injuries when you're doing major construction like this.
Excuse me, 2 minutes left. 2 minutes are left.
I got 20 minutes, by the way. I need it. A typical site, this is Blackfriars, just behind the building there on the left is St. Paul's. What we had to do was move that pier to the other side of the bridge, which is what you see at the bottom left. At the end of it all, we are creating some more public space for folks to enjoy the river and the scenes of London. But underneath all of that, it's all the engineering. So that's the shaft that connects one of our major CSOs to the tunnel. And I could talk about 2 hours on this part. So the design is we use all the tools that we got, CFD modeling, 3D CAD for BIM, he gives me dirty looks down there. I don't know what a dirty look in Polish looks like, but I can see one right now. Physical modeling, all of that. We have 19 sites, and you can see some of these little pictures. Some of our sites are very constrained. You know, they're in the middle of neighborhoods or in the middle of a park that people don't want to disturb because there's not many parks. I don't know about the engineering. I don't know if the photographer tried to get the label straight, but you would think they could have got the label straight on that for the TBM, which is delivered and ready to go. We have a big commitment to use the water as much as possible. So you can think of the number of lorries needed to transport materials in and out of the system. So we're using the river as much as possible for steel. We're also looking at how we can reduce noise and pollution. And so we're using, in the top left there is a concrete delivery that's using an electric hybrid delivery truck, so it's a lot quieter when it's doing its little spinning of the concrete. Also the high visibility cabs so that the drivers can see which bicycle they're going to run over, if you like, so they can tell that. A picture of our construction of a few months ago. This is one of our major shafts where we do a double drive from, so a tunnel will go east and a tunnel machine will go west. We're getting ready to push that out. Some of our sites, as I said, very constrained. This is at one of our storm pumping stations, so when it rains, that pumps to the river to avoid flooding of a major part of the city. We have a legacy of making improvements, so because we're destroying a good-sized part of a park, we're restoring their changing rooms and giving them a lot better legacy after it's all said and done. Our period is illustrated this is our regulatory, this is what we've agreed with government to get done. We have 3 major milestones, if you will. When we're ready for commissioning, when we're ready to hand over for full CSO control operations. Then because there's 2 companies involved of Tideway and Thames Water, we have this period that we call the acceptance period that says it's really been built and can be operated properly. I'll just skip that one. So where we are is, I'll wrap it up. Each one of those 20-second slides I could spend an hour talking about. So if you need more information, we have a good web page site called Tideway.London, and I'm more than willing to accept any emails or questions you may have, and my email is pretty simple, david.crawford@tideway.london. So if you want to contact me, do that. I may not be able to answer the question, but I'm sure I can pass it on to someone who can. Thank you.